In 6 days' time, Australians will head to the polls, if they haven't already voted, to have the say on a referendum on whether to change the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing a body called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. Well, joining me live is Dr. Shireen Morris, a constitutional lawyer and director at Radical Centre Reform Lab. Thank you very much, Doctor, for joining us, and certainly hoping to clarify a few questions that people might be wanting to know about what they are going to be voting on. The first referendum in 24 years. So what I thought we'd do is we put up on screen what they're voting for. So first of all, the question there. So do you want to take it away?
Yes, so basically this is a very simple yes or no question. Do we say yes to finally recognising Indigenous peoples in the Constitution from which they were excluded in 1901 by giving them an advisory voice in laws and policies made about them? So it's practical recognition, right? Practical recognition that will hopefully deliver better results through listening in Indigenous affairs.
All right, well, let's pull up the next screen because we have the 3 points that is part of the recognition. So the first one, there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. So talk us through what that means.
Yeah, so this is the change to the Constitution that we're voting on, and this is what all our discussion should be about, because this is the change that the Australian people need to decide, are we putting this in the Constitution? So you can see the first line there, it's about recognising Indigenous peoples as the first peoples of Australia. This is what it's all about. And Clause 1 says there shall be a body to be called the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Voice. That's our guarantee. That's like if we vote yes to this, that's the promise we as Australians are making, that Indigenous people will always be able to give advice on laws and policies made about them. That's the guarantee.
So I guess what some people are saying is, what is that body? Who is going to be made up of that body? How many people are going to be in that body?
Yeah, this question about where's the detail, who's hiding the detail. I think it's really important to show people what we're voting on. And if you can bring it up on the screen again, I always show people the constitutional change, because look at Clause 3 there, right? Clause 3 says that the Parliament shall, subject to this Constitution, have power to make laws.
We're going up to 2, but we'll go to 3 now.
Okay, yeah. Number 3 there. The Parliament has power to make laws with respect to matters relating to the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice, including its composition, functions, powers and procedures. So the answer to the question, where's the detail, is it's Parliament's job to legislate all the detail about how this voice will operate. So as I said, this referendum is about the principle, yes or no. Do we say yes or no to recognising Indigenous peoples by giving them an advisory voice? If we say yes to that, then it's Parliament's job, according to this constitutional change, the whole Parliament, Labor, Liberal, Greens, Teals, One Nation, the whole Parliament gets to decide through legislation all the details about how this voice will look. And that's really important to understand, because it means that the details can change over time, because legislation's flexible, whereas the Constitution is locked in. And it does not make sense to lock in details into the Constitution, right? The Constitution's Australia's highest legal rule book. It's the place for principles, and it's the place where we tell Parliament to set up important institutions. What the Constitution doesn't do is set out all the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of those institutions. That's Parliament's job, because those details need to change and improve over time.
Another question people from the no side are saying, will this give First Nations people more rights than other Australians?
This doesn't take a single thing away from any other Australian. All this is saying is that when Parliament and government makes the special laws and policies that it does make about Indigenous peoples, by virtue of the fact that they were here for 65,000 years, suffered dispossession, suffered discrimination, right? That is why Parliament makes laws like the Native Title Act, closing the gap policies that relate to Indigenous peoples. This is simply saying that Indigenous communities should be able to give advice on those laws and policies, so better bang for buck can be achieved and better practical outcomes can be achieved. So I don't think it provides special rights. In fact, and I don't think it takes anything away from us, non-Indigenous people, But I do think we all win if this succeeds, because what it will be doing is finally including the one group, the Aboriginal peoples, who were explicitly excluded from the Constitution in 1901. It's finally correcting that original omission, but doing it in a practical way, not just a symbolic way, but a practical way that over time will help Australia close the gap.
We missed out the second part there, and I don't know if our directors can pop it up, but the second part says the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. There it is on the screen. Talk us through exactly what that means, if you don't mind.
That's right. So that describes the job of this body, yeah? So the first clause says there shall be a body, provides the guarantee, and clause 2 says what the job of this body is. And it says the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice may make representations to the Parliament and the Executive Government of the Commonwealth on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
So what would be some examples?
So, for example, a change to the Native Title Act, so closing the gap policies, things like that. And what's really important to understand is may make representations. That's just a more legally modest way of saying that it can give advice. And, you know, back in 2014, when constitutional conservatives like the now Liberal MP, Julian Leeser, sat down with experts like Professor Anne Toomey and Indigenous leaders like Noel Pearson, when they sat down to craft the original iteration of this drafting, off the back of 100 years of Indigenous people asking for a voice, they used the word advice. And then over the next 8-9 years, legal experts around the country switched from the word advice to representations to make doubly, triply sure that no one could argue that advice by convention should be followed in the same way that advice from ministers to the Governor-General by convention should be followed. So that's very important for your watchers, your viewers, to understand that the word representations is even more legally modest than advice, because it makes sure that Parliament and government stay in charge, you know. And what's the advice on? It's on matters relating to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Okay, what I'm also hearing then, if those matters are represented, and will you potentially, I know this is a, you know, hypothetical, but is there the chance that the more cases will go to the high courts?
Now, I mentioned how this was construed and conceived through collaboration between Indigenous leaders and constitutional conservatives. Julian Leeser, back then, before he was in Parliament, was the convener of the Conservative Samuel Griffiths Society. This guy loves the Constitution, right? He asked for a copy of the Constitution on his 10th birthday instead of a bike. He is the most paranoid guy when it comes to the High Court that I have ever met, honestly. He wrote about this amendment in 2016, long before Labor was pushing this. He wrote, "This is the kind of clause that Griffith, Barton and their colleagues might have drafted had they turned their minds to it. This is modestly drafted precisely to minimise High Court intervention and to keep Parliament in charge. This has been meticulously refined over 8-9 years with the leading experts around the country to make sure that we are not tied up in litigation, and in fact that Indigenous people are empowered, their voices are empowered, but it is done in a way that upholds the Constitution, fits with the Constitution and completely respects the Parliament." The Liberal-appointed Solicitor General said that this would be an enhancement of our democracy, and he is joined by other leading Liberals like the New South Wales Liberal leader, Mark Speakman, a very respected barrister, who agrees that this is modest and it would be an enhancement of our democracy, not to mention all the majority weight of legal opinion that endorses this as legally sound. So I think this was the safest, most pragmatic and practical option for constitutional recognition of Indigenous peoples that was ever on the table. The remarkable thing is that Indigenous people, over 80% of Indigenous people, as repeated polls show, in their pragmatism, in their generosity, have adopted this constitutionally conservative form of recognition. And they're stretching out the hand of friendship to us non-Indigenous people, which I think is remarkable given what they've been through in this country. You know, the exclusion, the discrimination, the dispossession, the violence. Yet they're coming to us with hands outstretched saying, can you recognise us, please? And all they're asking for is an advisory voice that keeps Parliament and government in charge.
Why do you think, in your opinion, would the people on the no side say this is actually dividing us?
Well, why? I think the reason is politics. I think the no case, and Peter Dutton decided, unfortunately, to play politics with this, and that's really sad for him and his party and for the country. But as I said, there are many really good principled Liberals, and Liberals for Yes is out there spruiking a yes vote in this upcoming referendum. So it's not about Labor or Liberal. It's about uniting the country. It's about right or wrong, not left and right. But on this point about will this divide us by race, or, you know, Dutton has claimed this will put race back into the Constitution, it's completely wrong. It's a lie, in fact. Unfortunately, race has been in the Constitution since 1901, and we've been divided by race under the Constitution since then. Indigenous people were excluded under race-based discriminatory clauses. No group has suffered more under those provisions than they. And there are two racist provisions still in the Constitution. You know, so it is completely incorrect to say that this divides us by race. This actually includes the original owners of this land who were previously excluded on the basis of race. This is about making a commitment to listening, to partnership, unity, you know, in contrast to the division and exclusion of the past. So this is about unifying, not dividing.
We have to wrap it up, unfortunately, but as a constitutional lawyer, in Australia, 8 out of 44 have been successful, so only 8 have won out of the 44. Not a great track record. It does look like, at this stage, the polls are saying it is going to be a no. In general terms, in constitutions, why do the majority of them fail?
It's a high threshold. You know, a successful referendum requires a majority of voters in a majority of states. So 4 out of 6 states need to vote yes, and a majority nationally. But this is not over yet. The yes side is definitely behind, but there is a week to go. There's 6 days to go. And I would say to every Australian, if you think that what Indigenous people are asking for here, to be recognised simply through having an advisory voice in decisions made about them, if you think that's fair, have conversations with your grandmother, your grandfather, your parents, your uncles, your aunties, your colleagues, because this is up to ordinary Australians. It is up to us to decide whether or not we recognise people in 2023.
All right. Well, we were crossing to Julia Bradley, our reporter in Parramatta, where you were just at the rally there. It was very crowded, and yes, 6 days' time. Thank you very much for joining us and for your expertise, and all the very best. Perhaps we'll talk to you in a week's time and see the outcome.
Thanks so much, Janie.
Thank you very much.